This video may contain content that some may find triggering or offensive. Please watch at your own risk. Alright, strap in everyone because I am about to bring you on a magic carpet ride journey through the release of the new Percy Jackson and the Olympians TV show, of which the first season will cover the entirety of the first book of the series. Will it live up to expectations? Will it be a faithful adaptation, as the author, who is heavily involved in the show's production, and the entirety of the cast have been reassuring us longtime fans? Will Disney find a way to screw this up, or will the downfall of the show be caused by the very people who created it? Tune in over the next 6 weeks as I dissect this show right down to the bone and see if it lives up to the hype. So, before we get started, for the sake of the uninitiated or the TV-only crowd, I want to give a very, very brief background history on the journey Percy Jackson has gone through to get to this point as a Disney Plus TV show adaptation. Basically, we got two 20th Century Fox movies in 2010 and 2013 which adapted the first two books. The author, Rick Riordan, had offered his assistance to the production of the films and even provided feedback on the scripts that were sent his way. Unfortunately, because corporate stupidity is a thing, they ignored him entirely and pretty much butchered the fun children's adventure story and turned it into a bland, edgy teenager drama/comedy thing that didn't work out. Rick has since distanced himself from those films and hasn't even watched them himself. Then, when Disney acquired the rights to the show after buying literally every media company in existence, he repitched the show to them in 2020 and got to be involved in the process of the new show's creation, including casting, scriptwriting, the whole thing. Now that the show has arrived, let's break it down and see if 1, it surpasses the movies, and 2, it succeeds at being a faithful adaptation of the book. Do note that I'm going to be dissecting the show with as much of a critical eye that I can muster, not because I want to be a downer or a pessimist, but because everyone involved in this production has been promising and talking non-stop for 3 years about how this is going to be the faithful adaptation fans have been waiting for. So they are the ones who are setting the bar high. So, I'm going to be doing a general play-by-play of the episode, but I'll jump around here and there if my thoughts wander. Also, this video is sort of intended for fans of the books, so I might reference things that happen later on in the books, or make references to things only they can understand. I'll try to be as spoiler-free as possible though. As well, I decided to bust out my old copy of the book and do a read-along at the same pace as the show, so I can better compare the two without forgetting any details, because it's been a while since I've read it. Well, with that being said, what is my opinion on the 2-episode premiere? Alright, I did enjoy the start of episode 1. The narration being taken straight from the first chapter of the book is a nice touch, and the line delivery is acceptable. The flashbacks to various events in Percy's childhood was a pretty smart way of delivering Easter eggs to longtime fans while allowing us to get a feel for the world. Also, that's my boy Blackjack right there! However, the actual introduction of Percy's character when comparing the books and the show are different. Percy said he's a troubled kid in the books. He then goes on to describe various events where he was responsible for various school field trip disasters, resulting in a never-ending cycle of expulsion and re-enrollment at a new school every year. For TV people only, in his 5th grade he accidentally blew up his school bus with an antique war cannon, and then in his 4th grade he pulled the wrong lever in an aquarium catwalk and sent his teacher and classmates for a little swim with the sharks. You get a feel that misfortune follows him everywhere, and as a result, school is very miserable for him. Let's compare this to the show. He says he's a troubled kid, just like in the book. However, what is the extent of this troubledness? Aside from the usual bullying and bad grades, he sees things no one else sees, which sometimes gets him a stern talking to. And that's about it. No mention about expulsions, no real consequences to any of the weird stuff. It just feels like a really watered down version of the books. Anyway, the first big divergence comes during the inciting incident where Mrs. Dodds, the math teacher, reveals her true identity as a Fury and attacks Percy. In the book, she took him into the museum and isolated him from everyone, while here she attacks him in public. I don't really understand this change, but it isn't a huge deal breaker, as it was a good opportunity to show how the mist operates, which is the magical veil that hides monsters from regular humans. However, the way this scene was shot and the way it was scored was very lacking in energy. Percy's reaction is strangely muted and calm for someone whose teacher just turned into a literal monster from hell and pounced on him. As well, while there was a bit of action in the books where he attempts to flee before killing her with his sword, in the show he just lies there and accidentally kills her. I wasn't sold on the suddenness and lethality of the attack, whereas in the book it's like a huge holy moment. It sort of just happens. Overall, I feel that this scene, the inciting incident of the entire story, which is supposed to show us the reality of the magical world, came off as very hand-wavy as opposed to what it should have felt like. It should have gripped me, but I felt nothing other than, wait, that's it? The next couple of scenes sort of condense the next 2 chapters of the books, which I'm fine with. I understand that in adaptations, sometimes you need to make changes that streamline the story, and an extended sequence about Percy going through the rest of the school year feeling like a loser, or thinking that he was going crazy, would have probably been very clunky to adapt. But everything's okay. In fact, I can forgive any grievances I have with the show, because at least they kept the best character in the series, Eddie the apartment janitor. They did him justice. Just kidding, he literally only has 2 sentences of dialogue in the entire book. Here's another point of contention I feel like a lot of people had with the show, and that was the depiction of Percy's stepfather, Gabe Ugliano. Now, this might be a controversial opinion, but I think Gabe in the movies, played by Joe Pantoliano, was played to perfection, down to the attitude, the mannerisms, and the overall look of the character. He's supposed to be a sleazy, lazy, greedy, rude, and abusive stepfather, and Pantoliano managed to bring out every aspect of Book Gabe. He oozes the appropriate aura. I mean, Book Percy even refers to him as Smelly Gabe, so take that what you will. But TV show Gabe, I mean, he's depicted as an unemployed bum, which, by the way, makes one of the best jokes of the book impossible to pull off later down the line, unless they somehow find a workaround that I can't really think about at the moment. But, that's about it. He's not particularly mean to Percy, and he doesn't really look like a sleazy bloke. His entire character has, again, just been watered down. While the books never had any outright explicit abusive scenes from Gabe, you could tell from Percy and his mom's attitude towards him, as well as the description of the apartment, that Gabe was a trash human being. In the show, their apartment just looks like a normal apartment, not really trashy, and I don't really feel strongly about him one way or the other, which kinda sucks. But, I mean, is it bad that I actually kind of like this depiction of Gabe? Not genuinely like him, but they made him kind of funny. Just the way he talks with Sally and everything. He honestly might be my favorite character in the first 2 episodes, which is really ironic considering what his character's like in the book. I did like how they depicted Sally Jackson as a caring mother who taught Percy all he knew about Greek mythology. There's several moments between the two where the show demonstrates their close relationship, which is really great for setting up later dynamics down the line. And the actress did a pretty good job with that. And hey, they kept the blue food. That's a bonus. That's an iconic staple of the books, which the movies did not have. Another thing about the show that bothered me were the transitions. There are a lot of awkward fade to black transitions that make the show feel really disjointed and awkward. I have no idea what the reasoning behind this was, as it's the only Disney Plus show I've seen that does this. It felt like there were supposed to be commercials in those breaks, but this is a streaming platform. You're not supposed to have commercials. That's such an old thing. Kids these days wouldn't understand dashing to the washroom during commercial breaks or fetching a snack as fast as you possibly could in hopes that you didn't miss any of your show. I feel like such an old person saying this, oh my goodness. But anyway, as per the accelerated sequence of events, Percy and his mom head out to their vacation cabin. To give a bit more praise to the show, I did like the interaction between Percy and Sally in the vacation cabin when she attempts to explain his godly heritage to him, because it also resulted in the funniest joke in the entire show so far.
You fell in love with God? Like Jesus?
While the conversation in the cabin scene was a bit more exposition heavy than the book, I thought it was a fine way to present information to the viewer. But then we get to the next action-heavy scene of the story when the Minotaur pursues their car as they rush to the safety of Camp Half-Blood. And this is where they just go overboard with the exposition. Grover just feels like a machine rattling off necessary facts for the audience. I feel like it could have been streamlined so much better, either here or presented in other places. Although I will admit, on my second rewatch, I caught Grover's line about his real age because satyrs age half as fast as humans, and I thought it was pretty funny, especially Percy's reaction.
Boys? Yeah? I'm actually 24. Hold on, please.
Even when they do get to camp, I feel like there's very little sense of urgency. For the most part, the characters talk kind of slow, not too much energy, the pacing of the scene is rather sluggish, and I don't get the sense that we should be concerned that a gigantic mythological monster is chasing them down. And Percy's call for his mom when she gets abducted isn't exactly the gold standard of acting. I I feel like the actor could have benefited from a bit more direction. He has some pretty okay facial expressions during the fight itself, though, but like the Mrs. Dodds fight, this one also ends with a whimper. I can't pinpoint exactly why, but I think it has to do with how it's shot. The last shot in particular doesn't really emphasize the fact that Percy literally rips the Minotaur's horn off and uses it to finish him off. I feel like I would have liked to see a bit more weight behind that, because it comes across as happening extremely fast without any weight behind what actually just happened. This is a huge moment in the books, Percy's first victory against what many characters consider to be a high-tier monster, but here, I don't feel that. Like all the other action scenes, it just passes really quickly, and we're not given enough time to react to what just happened. I did like that the first half of the battle had no music, though. That did add to the rawness of what was happening. My issue with how the battle ended still stands, though. The episode ends at an appropriate spot. I just think Chiron's silhouette looks pretty awful. Something about the proportions of the man part of his body to the horse part of his body just looks really goofy. Alright, on to episode 2. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to change the way the famous Annabeth line, "You drool when you sleep," was delivered. It's done in the weirdest way possible, where Percy's still half-conscious from his fight, and everything's really distorted from his point of view, and then you see Annabeth just ominously rise into the frame and deliver the line in the most threatening way possible.
You drool when you sleep.
In the books, it was the first thing she ever said to him when he was awake, and it was played mostly as a humorous line because he had been expecting her to be impressed with his fight with the Minotaur. But here, it once again just feels like they threw in the line just to get a reaction out of book fans without any consideration as to why book fans loved it in the first place. Anyway, the scene in the movie where Percy wakes up and gets told the news that his mom died is often seen as a meme because he basically has no reaction and he acts like he just missed the bus or something.
No. All of it was real?
While I was hoping the show would linger a bit more on Percy's emotional state as it did in the book, it sort of doesn't. He doesn't seem to have any strong reactions other than that deadpan neutral look on his face that the actor often has. This leads into another point I wanted to make about the show so far. While the main characters are child actors and you can't exactly expect Oscar-worthy performances from them, they're not completely new to acting either. I took a look at their filmographies and they do have experience acting in big-budget shows and films. But here, I feel like it's either the fault of the acting direction or the writing, or both. Lots of times, dialogue is delivered in a very clunky and lifeless way. Percy often has that same look on his face, as I mentioned before. Grover is a bit better, and he has a few moments where there's some life to his performance, but a lot of his screen time in these 2 episodes is devoted to just being an exposition machine. Annabeth, for how little screen time she has in the 2nd episode, and trust me, it's not a lot, she's basically a blank slate that just stares at your soul the entire time like she's trying to violently melt you or something. But maybe the rest of the episode can redeem itself, right?
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Episode 2 felt weirdly disjointed, with strange pacing that felt like it was going both too fast and too slow at the same time. Entire scenes exist solely for the purpose of delivering even more exposition to the audience, the most grievous example being at the end of the episode, where the entire premise of the book, the quest to go retrieve Zeus's stolen lightning bolt, is reduced down to a brief conversation, like 2 minutes long, with no connection to the rest of the episode. It almost felt like an afterthought. I wouldn't object so much if a lot of the exposition was delivered in an interesting way, but it's not really. There's a scene where the characters are preparing for the big capture the flag game, and then they literally stop to sit down and eat and explain even more backstory and exposition before proceeding with the game. I'm sure they could have found ways to streamline it, but the way it's presented left a lot to be desired. And then there's the infamous toilet scene with Clarice, which, like a lot of the previous action scenes, and by that I mean all of them, it just felt so lifeless to me. It was a lot more explosive in the books, and I did not get that same energy from the show. Again, part of it might have had to do with Percy's reaction, or lack thereof, but I think it mostly comes down to feeling like there was just no impact at all. Even Annabeth, who in the books was described as staring at the scene in shock, having gotten caught in the blast radius when she was just standing in the doorway of the washroom, in the show she just looked on with a deadpan expression on her face, not even reacting to what just happened. On that note, I do want to talk a little bit more about Annabeth and how she's portrayed in the show versus the books. She did not get a lot of screen time in this episode, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of the things she did in the book, such as showing Percy around the camp and explaining most of the stuff about the mythological world, that role was given to Luke. I think they're trying to establish the budding relationship between Luke and Percy so that there can be more payoff at the end of the story. Book readers know exactly what I'm talking about. But I feel like in doing so, they robbed Annabeth of a lot of moments with her and Percy. Book Annabeth was a bit standoffish towards Percy at first, but at least she was willing to explain things that he didn't know. They also had a lot of more back-and-forth banter, which allowed Percy to show off his more sarcastic and snide personality in much more detail. We get only 3 brief interactions with them in this episode, and they're not particularly revealing of their personalities, except for a little bit of the second one, when they're preparing for the capture the flag. She also comes across as more aggressive towards him, especially in how they handled the reveal of his father, but more on that later. I guess they wanted to show how she's always thinking and figuring things out, but it was this way in the book as well. She just felt less rude. Book Annabeth was never rude, but I get those vibes from the way TV Annabeth has been written. All's that to say, I don't think they succeeded in portraying Annabeth as being accurate to the books that they had been claiming this entire time. Partly because they gave her such little material to work with that it's hard to get a feel for what she's like as a character. Maybe they're allocating more of her scenes for later episodes, but at this point in time, she doesn't get much to work with, and it shows. Also, the show contradicts itself by saying Luke is the best camp warrior, only to say 20 minutes later that Annabeth is the strongest warrior in the camp. It's like they're trying to hype up Annabeth for more girl power moments, but, you know, if we're being real, Annabeth doesn't need hyping up. She's Annabeth. Book readers know how awesome she is, and we don't need to be told every 5 seconds that she's awesome. But then comes one of the main scenes from the book, the capture the flag sequence. It's largely similar, but there are a few details that don't really add up, which, again, leaves the scene to be a little less, let's say, flavorful, in my opinion. Particularly the fight between Percy and the Ares cabin and the way it unfolds. So in the book, he ends up getting pulverized by them until he falls into a stream, which then invigorates him and lets him get the upper hand. This does not happen in the show. He gets vaguely pushed near a body of water, he doesn't fall in, and then suddenly he beats all of them. Some people might argue it was the proximity to the water that boosted him, but this to me is not much of an argument and a bit too much of a reach. The point of the scene in the book was to show what Percy excels at and what triggers his power. Having him not touch the water to beat Clarice leaves the interpretation too vague, since we never get any confirmation otherwise, and it just makes him look like he got overpowered because of convenience. Even if the writers end up confirming this in interviews outside the show, that he gained powers from the water because he was close to it, I'm looking at the show itself and how it presents the scene, and I don't think they did a good job at that. It also paints Annabeth as more of a jerk when she shoves Percy into the water to confirm his powers. Again, even though Book Annabeth wasn't the friendliest towards him, she never went as far as to physically push Percy around. She figured out Percy's abilities by observing and then telling him to get out of the water, which, based on her dialogue, confirms her already established suspicions. This shows us that she was always thinking, always analyzing, but not in a way that makes us think she's a jerk. Again, it's almost like they just wanted to give Annabeth a cool, ooh, you go, girl power moment. But it doesn't really match with the book's depiction of Annabeth. The other vital thing that I have no idea why they left it out was the Hellhound attack. In the book, after the game finishes, Percy is immediately attacked by a Hellhound, which is quickly dispatched by Chiron, but it gives the story a new sense of urgency. It tells us dark forces are on the move, they're somehow getting into camp, something that should be impossible, and the characters now need to figure out what's going on. This plays into jump-starting the main quest, and it serves as foreshadowing for a certain character's actions and motivations later in the book. But in the show, for some whatever reason, they just decided to remove that important scene entirely. This is when the show makes a 100-meter dash past the key conflict of the story. Zeus's lightning bolt has been stolen, Percy is being accused, and he has to go on a quest to the underworld to retrieve it before the summer solstice arrives and war breaks out. Oh, and he's going to rescue his mom while he's at it. All this is explained in literally 2 minutes, and once again, as I said before, it feels like a throwaway scene. We're not given enough time to process the implications of what was just happening. In my opinion, this should have been saved for the beginning of the next episode. Take 5 minutes to fully explain what's going on, give us a reason to be invested, and we're good to go. So, that was the first 2 episodes. Overall, there are small elements here and there that I enjoyed. I like what scarce lines of sass we get from Percy, though it's not nearly enough. I like some of the adult characters, but honestly, that's about it. The acting is bland a lot of the time. The writing is awkward and stilted. The action isn't energetic or exciting, and it doesn't grab you. Scenes from the book are either omitted entirely or presented in a weird way that doesn't give the vibe of a faithful adaptation. The score is unfortunately quite run-of-the-mill, with no outstanding or memorable themes besides the main one. I'm most disappointed about this because Bear McCreary is one of my favorite contemporary film composers, and I find it sad that his score for Percy Jackson just sounds so uninspired. Granted, I personally wasn't expecting much from this show in the first place. Even with the news of Rick Riordan being attached, that didn't really reassure me at all. I know all of his fans act like he's a god of storytelling who can do no wrong, but keep in mind, this is the guy who rushed the last book of the Heroes of Olympus, made the Magnus Chase series way too preachy and on the nose with its messaging, and wrote the Trials of Apollo, one of the most forgettable and contrived series that didn't need to exist, which undid and watered down and contradicted the characterizations of so many fan-favorite characters from the previous 2 series. Some may crucify me for this, but I'll say it again. The movie did a better job in a select few aspects than the TV show did. The show also looks weirdly cheap. With a quick Google search, I found out that the budget of each episode was $12 to $15 million. Now, if you don't think that's a lot, compare that to the final season of Game of Thrones, which had a reported budget of $15 million per episode. Now, whatever opinions you have on the writing of Game of Thrones, you can't deny that they went all out on the special effects with the massive battles, the set pieces, the dragons, and everything that goes into making a fantasy world come alive on the screen. Having made that comparison, I have but one question for Disney. Where did all the money go for Percy Jackson? The production looks average, the acting is subpar, the special effects are often jarring and janky, the locations and set pieces aren't particularly outstanding, so what's the deal? It's not like there are any A-list stars here eating up the budget, and it was filmed in Canada, where stuff is usually filmed to save on budget. So, where's the money, Disney? What did you do with it? Where is it, huh?
Where is the money?
Anyway, aside from that, there's one more gripe with the show I have, and it's probably the most controversial one of the bunch, because a lot of people have been talking about this, there's been so much controversy and discourse around it, and it's about the visuals. Not the special effects, but the physical appearance of the characters. It's well known that the casting for Annabeth was met with polarizing reception due to the actress not resembling the book's depiction of the character at all. Unfortunately, most fans who've had a very valid and civil reason to be disappointed with the changes were instantly outed and labeled as being racist. Even Rick Riordan himself joined in on the clown show and called everyone who did not agree with the casting racist. Because even if you say you aren't racist, you are, according to him, still racist. And everyone is racist, even if you don't think you are. I'm not making this up, it's literally on his blog. Look, in my view, being disappointed that a character does not look like how they are described, especially a pre-established character who has existed for the better part of 20 years, is a valid reason to be upset, especially after endless promises that this adaptation would be faithful to the books. The main argument I've seen time and time again is that Annabeth's personality is the only thing about her that matters. Physical appearances be damned. Now, if you're an artist, you probably know something about this, and I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Physical appearances are just as important as personality. They are 2 halves that make up a whole. The appearance of a character is what makes them recognizable on sight. It's part of how we connect to the character, especially in a visual medium. Book Annabeth is associated with the image of a typical Californian girl with a tan, blonde hair, and intense gray eyes. Taking away every identifiable feature of a character and claiming it's still the same one just because they act the same isn't a strong argument. It turns into a Ship of Theseus type of situation. Well, that's appropriate, given what the show's about. How much can you strip away from a character until that character is no longer themselves? Does it apply only to the physical appearance? Why is it that when characters retain the personality but not the looks, it's okay? But when the character retains the looks and not the personality, like Annabeth from the Sea of Monsters movie, why is that considered bad? These questions need to be asked, because the double standard is honestly infuriating. And I'm not just talking about Annabeth, I'm just using her as the most prominent example because she's the character that most of this discourse has been going around with. But so many of the other main characters don't look like how they were described and drawn for over 20 years. Percy doesn't look like Percy. Grover doesn't look like Grover. Luke doesn't look like Luke. Clarice doesn't look like Clarice. Chiron doesn't look like Chiron. Gabe doesn't look like Gabe, and, well, you get the idea. I am equally dissatisfied with all of these characters. So, just in case I see people trying to call me racist, you can't, because you can't be a racist if you hate everyone equally, am I right? I know it's important to hire actors based on acting ability, but looks is just as important. And it's not like there's a shortage of actors. Take a look at the upcoming live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender series on Netflix. As of the recording of this video, that show has yet to release. But if you showed me a picture of the people that they cast as the main characters, I would be able to tell you who was who with 100% accuracy, because they actually tried and succeeded in hiring actors who look like the characters they are supposed to be portraying. Percy Jackson, while they may have had good intentions with casting, failed spectacularly on this front. And that's about it from me. So, what did you all think of the episode? Was this the adaptation you've been dreaming of? Did it live up to your expectations, or were you too disappointed by the product that we got? Let me know down in the comments. And stay tuned for the next episode's review. It took me a bit longer than expected to write the script for this video, but that's partly because there were 2 episodes in the premiere that I wanted to cover at the same time. And I also wanted to talk about more general comments I had for the show, so that I don't have to repeat myself over and over again in future videos. Anyway, that's all for today. Bye.